So what's going on here? All right, we talked yesterday about how where we last left off, King Louis XVI, he was trying to get the heck out of France. He tried to escape because he thought the people were turning against him, and a lot of people thought that what he was doing was trying to get out of France so he could run to some of his allies outside of France, get them to back him up, bring some armies in, go in and defeat the revolutionaries and set up his kingship again. And a lot of monarchs, a lot of kings and queens in Europe really felt like they had to put a stop to this revolution. They'd seen kings overthrown before, but this was a little bit different because the people that overthrew this king or took his power away were saying that king's powers didn't come from God. They were saying that the people basically had the right to overthrow the king when they saw fit. And the other kings and queens did not want to let that kind of idea grow. Okay, so what goes on? Some craziness. French Revolution led to drastic changes, and France, this is about 1793, about 4 years after the revolution gets started, gets into all sorts of wars. There's no other way to describe it than that. Okay, there's some questions you can use to review. All right, so Louis and Marie Antoinette, they get imprisoned, not very well liked for a lot of reasons, even though they did a lot as king and queen to try to get closer to the people. In the end, they're kind of brought down by the fact that things just finally get so crazy that people don't want a king or queen. They actually really weren't that bad. A lot of people think Louis XVI was like a horrible king, but he really wasn't. He was actually pretty decent. He wasn't great, but he was okay. And Marie Antoinette, she's very unpopular because she seems out of touch with the people. She goes and starts, like I told you, she had a little cottage at Versailles that was like a little rustic cottage, and she would go out and pretend she was a peasant and, live the rustic life kind of thing. And real peasants were kind of like, you don't know anything of what it's like to be a peasant. She also, like I said, was from Austria. And that was becoming more and more of a problem where people thought that maybe she didn't really have the best interest of the French people at heart. So things are getting crazy. German and Austrian monarchs are a little bit worried, the kings and queens of those countries. Germany's not a country, so we're talking about lots of different kings and queens when we talk of Germany. Austria is a country at that time. There were some other ones in there too. The British are a little bit concerned. The British, the English actually, have done a pretty good job of having a king, but also at the same time, like having a constitution that protects people's rights. So, but they're still worried that this revolution might spread. And the French are talking about spreading this revolution to other countries, overthrowing the kings and queens, getting crazy. Okay, Louis had accepted a lot of what the National Assembly had said to him. They said, okay, these are going to limit your powers and you don't get to make the laws. And once he gets captured, he starts to kind of come around to this stuff and say, okay, that really sounds great, guys. I was on board from the beginning. Let's try to figure this out. The problem is at this point, he's in a lot of trouble. So France, knowing that Louis was kind of trying to get to Austria, because remember, Marie's brother is king of Austria, basically. They were trying to get away. The French think they were trying to get away to get to Austria, so Austria would invade France. So what does France do in order to kind of end this thing fast? They declare war on Austria. The war throws the country into complete upheaval. And now the people begin to suspect the king and queen of plotting against the French people. So crowds or mobs are getting crazy. They're killing royal guards. Mobs are getting nobles, priests. They're imprisoning them. And because war scares people, the people that say the most scary things, the radicals, get to take over the National Assembly. They take over because more people back them. They're the ones saying we have to fight a war to protect this revolution. We have to export the revolution, which means get anywhere we can, and we have to stop any opposition to this revolution has to be stamped out. So these radicals want to make big changes, and that's exactly what they do. They kind of scrap. There was the National Assembly. They scrap that, and they bring in something called the National Convention. Their government is going to have a lot of big changes. First off, the king is out. Now, as soon as that happens, Louis XVI's fate is sealed. He's not going to live much longer because you can't, just say, well, the king's out, but you know what? No big deal. Louis, you just go and, find a job or something. It'll be fine. No, as long as the king lives, things are going to be, it's a possibility somebody could come back in, take over, and put the king back on the throne. They're going to have a single national legislature. So one lawmaking body, the National Convention, they'll make the laws. All men could vote. There would be no property qualifications. This is pretty revolutionary. Again, not revolutionary enough that they included women, but all men could vote. They adopted a new calendar, and the calendar went kind of crazy with things. They took all the months that are in many cases named after Roman emperors and things like that and stuff like that. And they remade the calendar into something. I think they ended up doing 10 months. They totally renamed the months. They started the calendar over at year 0. They changed the names of not days, but I think they had like a 10-day week, and every day had 10 hours, and every hour had 10 minutes, and that was how they divided things up. They thought of it as being more logical, more rational if you divided things in tens. Same place we got the metric system, basically, and that's what we got down there. So totally remake society, totally revolutionize it. Okay, so Louis, they had to figure out what to do with him. They can't send him out of France because that's what he was trying to do in the first place. If he gets out of France and starts to pull support from other kings and queens, he might come back in and overthrow whatever government's in place. Chris? Yeah. So if you basically think of it this way, if you took a day of 24 hours and you made it 10 hours and you made it 10 hours, your hour is going to be more like what we would think of as 2.5 hours. And yeah, they still called them hours. But the idea is you divide it into 10, and they looked at something like the imperial, what we call the imperial measurement system. Think about measuring things in feet. Well, okay, so what is it? 12 inches to a foot, 3 feet to a yard, 5,280 feet to a mile. Just that sort of strange. They were very, very metric, wanted that base 10 system. So they got to figure out what to do with Louis. And the radicals are able to find some of Louis's letters. And these are letters sent to other kings and queens saying, things are getting kind of crazy here. I wonder if you can help us out a little bit. And they used them to discredit him. And it looks like he was plotting against the people of France. So that's why you saw that picture yesterday. That's him getting his head chopped off I forget who mentioned it, but the people, the National Convention saw it as a crime he had committed. He had conspired against the people of France because invading armies from other countries coming in and causing havoc seems like you're plotting against your own people. He had conspired against the liberty of the nation, and they executed him by guillotine. Okay, so the king's out. They execute Marie after that too, but Louis went first. And so now they're talking about a republic, which is a democratic country with no king, basically what the United States was. But not copycatting the United States. They were drawing on Enlightenment ideas their own selves and saying, what's the best way to form a government? So the National Convention, things are getting real crazy here. And you got different groups of people. You got Jacobins. These guys believed in radical change. And they said that they were the voice of the people. And so they were the ones that should control and move the revolution forward. The Jacobins are going to, in a lot of cases, say that for the revolution to be successful, for the changes that are big for them to work, it has to be complete. You have to throw out the way things were before completely and just do a new thing, set it all up and start over. The Girondists, on the other hand, were moderates. They thought things had really gone far enough. I mean, what more do you want? You got rid of a king. You've made society much more equal in a lot of cases. But they thought that since the radicals thought they were the voice of the people, you got moderates that saying we have to protect, we can't go around just totally destroying everything people had before. That's not fair. And they want to protect the middle class. But over time, the more people get fearful, the more support moved toward the Jacobins or the Jacobins. So the rest of Europe is looking on this and they're saying this is nuts. Not all of them. Some of them are saying, "Oh, wow, this is going to be good." And there were Americans in particular who thought that France was undergoing a revolution a lot like the American Revolution, and that this had to work itself out. Thomas Jefferson was a big supporter of the French Revolution at many points. So, but the European kings and queens thought that, listen, if you let the people rule, if you let them carry out revolutions and stuff, things are going to get bad. So they started forming alliances against the French. The French, remember, have already declared war on the Austrians, and they're marching all over Europe. And they went back to that reason thing, and they looked at what they saw. They thought that the natural borders of France should be in this and that place, and their idea was to expand its borders and take over what were the natural frontiers of France as they saw it. They conscripted, this is the draft, all male citizens. The idea was that the country itself was under attack, and in order to protect it, they needed every male citizen who could fight to protect the country. This is the beginning right here. This is the first time a country uses what we call universal male conscription, which means that every male of a certain age is subject to draft into the military in times of war, which is something the United States still has. We haven't used it in a while, but we still have it. So the Jacobins and Girondists don't get along. The Girondists are saying, we got to put the brakes on here. The Jacobins are saying, no, we need to move this forward until it's complete. They even accused, the Jacobins accused the Girondists of trying to bring back the king. Now, the king, while he was dead, there were lots of nephews and nephews and brothers and people that could come back and take over the kingship again, which is what's going to happen later when they bring in Louis XVIII, but we'll get there later. So the Jacobins take over the National Convention. They decide they're going to crush all opposition as brutally as necessary. And this is going to become known as the Reign of Terror. And the Reign of Terror was all about finding anybody who opposed the revolution and eliminating them. Not even letting them leave the country. I mean, that's one thing. But in most cases, if they could get hold of these people and kill them, that was the best method. Because if they escaped outside the country, they could build up support there and try to invade France and end the revolution. So the word of the day was accuse your neighbors. They didn't even, these courts are not operating on a system of justice that, you have to have evidence and it has to be a jury. They're just, anybody accused, they're bringing him in. And if it seems good enough for them, they go, okay, he's an enemy of the revolution. Let's, take him out to the guillotine. And the guillotines, I mean, they are chopping heads off industrial style, man. It is not like, okay, well, no, they are chopping heads off as quick as they can every day. And it's public and people are going to see it. What of the what? Yeah, the Salem witch trials. And you see a lot of these whenever someone could benefit by accusing their neighbor, because someone that does this and says, aha, my neighbor and his family have been plotting against the revolution, not only does it, does it take the focus off of that person making the accusation, they are a friend of the revolution. They're hunting down all the traitors. It eliminates people that they consider undesirable. Yeah. And so the witch trials, just like the witch trials took on a sort of momentum of their own where people started to just kind of jump on the bandwagon of accusing people, the same thing happens here. And then it becomes, if you're not looking for somebody who's a traitor to the revolution, what are you doing? You're supposed to be finding people. Come on. Like, how come you haven't found any traitors to the revolution lately? So yeah, swift trials, harsh sentences. Chris. Yeah. Well, lots of people are saying just that. In that, at least the king wasn't, killing people at this rate. That's for sure. So yeah, there are people that the problem is if you spoke out and said, these guys are no better than, we're talking about a country made up of freedom and justice and protection of people's safety. And ironically, the organization carrying out all these executions is known as the Committee of Public Safety. They're saying this is, but if you even said stuff like what you just said, Chris, they're going to accuse you of being a traitor to the revolution. You think that we haven't gone far enough. We need to go forward. And terror was the idea. They really were trying to inspire terror among people so they wouldn't oppose the revolution. So it gets crazy. Eventually, that all grinds to a halt. Some people do begin to, especially in the National Convention, call for an end to the Reign of Terror. The France is actually winning a lot of its wars and defeating its enemies, so they're starting to say that the danger has passed. It's over. Then Robespierre does what I just talked to Chris about. He accuses them of being traitors. They're sent to the guillotine. Eventually, Robespierre guillotines a few too many people, And finally, the other leaders turn against him and he loses his support. And then he gets guillotined. Eventually, the Jacobins lose power. The terror comes to an end. And now you're going to get something called the Directory. Oh, wait, you get the convention. Okay. They govern for a little bit. Then they write a whole new constitution. So this is their third constitution in a row, basically. And they wanted to roll back some of those different things. That whole every man gets to vote, no, we're going to make them have some property qualifications. They also set up something called, this is the Directory, the Council of Directors. And they're kind of in the middle now. On one hand, there are people out in the French countryside who are trying to bring back the king. They were called royalists, and they're trying to bring the king back. And then there are radicals who are saying, no, we got to move the revolution forward. The Directory's kind of in the middle. They're really not very good at their jobs either. They kind of are pretty inept and incapable. And everybody feels that way. So what happens? Napoleon. This guy is just kicking butt when it comes to being a military leader. The French armies are out fighting the British and the Prussians and the Austrians and the Bavarians and all sorts of different countries that are allying against them. And they're winning and winning and winning and winning. And so Napoleon is one of the military leaders that's gaining a lot of success for this. He's a general, which is a pretty high rank at the age of 26. And he's very popular with the French troops. Defeats the Austrians. He conquers parts of northern Italy for France. He's doing great. He's got so much popularity when the Directory shows up and they do a really crappy job, Napoleon makes his move. He's fighting in Egypt against the British. The French lose there, so he hops on a boat, heads back to France. He shows up with his military success, and people just rally behind him. He and a few other leaders seized the government from the Directory. The Directory was kind of like, yeah, you're right. You take power. What had happened at this point was that people had become so sick of all the craziness of the revolution, and then so sick of the Directory that couldn't get the job done, that they just wanted somebody who would restore order and the craziness, and two, get stuff done. And that's what Napoleon promised to do. We'll look at that tomorrow. All right. How many questions? Smart. 6? All right. We'll take 7 minutes to make sure your notes are good. Make sure you can answer the questions. Whew.